Little Liberia, a little liberty, space to dream, without impositions limiting our abilities. Divine purpose knows no shackles, knows no chains, knows it is God who reigns, spaces built to sustain our excellence, places to be baptized, to pray, not to be preyed upon. Sing hallelujah on high while hiding and healing below. We are people who create, who build, who grow. People who know how far we can go with just a little liberty, a little liberation, a little free land, a little Liberia.
September 1st, 1854. My dear Douglas, it has been long since I have written to you. I have not been in the attitude for it, nor am I now, and yet further delay seems unnecessary. To begin, then, somewhere about the middle of August, I turned my face from toil and care and sought for refuge and the recreation at some point distant from Gotham. I found all I require in the flourishing little town of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Others may talk of Newport and Saratoga, of Cape May and Nahant, and Sulphur Springs and Massadonoc. But the Duncan House. Bridgeport built, owned, and kept by A. Duncan. The place where I rested from my labors is yet to eclipse all these. This new and excellent hotel is located in the best spot in the town, overlooking the bay, the city, and the adjacent country. No other hotel in Bridgeport is thus so finely situated, and as a place of resort and unalloyed pleasure, it offers advantages to the people of color beyond any other yet extant.
This description of a seaside resort and a thriving community for people of color comes to us from a letter published in Frederick Douglass's newspaper. The author of the letter, Brooklyn correspondent Ethiop, was none other than William J. Wilson, writer, teacher, and community leader, who later served as chairman of the U.S. Federal Freedmen's Bank. William J. Wilson visited Bridgeport, and his descriptions of the community make this neighborhood come alive. With few surviving written records, how can we be certain that this community, known as Little Liberia, even existed? We sometimes think of history as one story. We learn the story of the people in power, the people with the greatest number, or with the people with the megaphone to tell their story. But we know that's not the whole story. In this episode of See, Think, Wonder Bridgeport, we're going to look at stories told through a different type of primary source: material culture, the buildings, the artifacts, the stuff that gets left behind. The presence of Little Liberia can be traced to the early 1820s, when local saddle and harness manufacturer Seth Booton Jones sold a house half-mile south of Bridgeport Center to two men of color. These men, John Feely and Jacob Freeman, divided the stake in that property and began a trend of real estate investment, home ownership, and settlement in Bridgeport's South End that would attract other people of color, both Native American and Black. Looking at a map from 1850, we can see that the South End community once contained 36 structures and 2 churches. But the map's incomplete. The map does not include the Duncan House Hotel, built in 1840, the Stratfield School, built in 1845, the library, built in 1849, or the names of any of the property owners in Little Liberia. Until 1876, city records and census maps did not typically include the names of African and Native American property owners. And this is why material culture matters. The historical record is often incomplete. Cross-checking property transfers and city directories, scholars and historians right now are putting people's names on the map. Piecing together all of the evidence, original structures, artifacts, and the historical record, we're finally learning the silenced and nearly demolished history of Little Liberia. As a busy port and commercial center, Bridgeport presented opportunities for wage-earning labor not always present for people of color. Though often limited to manual or dangerous trades, opportunities for men included blacksmith, tanner, carter, mason, cooper, carpenter, shipbuilder, fisherman, oysterman, or whaler. Women were hired as cooks, seamstresses, or laundry and domestic help. People of color often faced wage discrimination and unfair labor practices. And yet, the struggle for the liberty that allows each of us to achieve success and the equality and justice that ensures that we're all equal in the eyes of the law is part of America's ongoing story. As a safe haven for Southern blacks fleeing slavery and free Northern blacks and Native Americans, as well as immigrants from Haiti, Jamaica, Cape Verde, and Ireland, Little Liberia was a place to live, grow, and achieve. Let's reconstruct this neighborhood. Most of the structures which once filled Little Liberia, or Little Free Land, have been demolished. But two structures remain, the houses of Mary and Eliza Freeman. In 1848, two free black women, Mary and Eliza Freeman, sold 13 acres of family property in Derby, Connecticut, purchased 2 lots on Main Street, and built 2 modest-sized wood frame houses. It would have been extremely rare for a woman to engage in these sorts of activities in the 19th century, and even more rare for a woman of color. Mary and Eliza built these houses in the same year Connecticut ended slavery. What do you see? Both houses are wood frame with wood clapboard siding and built over a raised brick basement. Why the raised basement? This area may not have been considered a desirable neighborhood in the 19th century. Prone to flooding and close to the salt marsh, people feared the threat of malaria. Having a raised brick basement probably protected the houses against flooding in the 19th century and today. Mary Freeman worked as a hotel chef. She built the side-by-side double house on the left. Older sister Eliza built the house on the right. Both sisters rented out these properties to laborers in Bridgeport while they continued to live and work in New York City. The sisters both returned to Little Liberia full-time in the mid-1850s. In 2009, the Freeman Center worked with preservation experts and Greater Bridgeport Community Enterprises to stabilize and weatherize the houses. They also worked to demolish some later additions. During this Phase 1 restoration, experts realized that much of the interior of the houses remains intact. We see doors and window casings, floors and mantelpieces, all dating to 1848. As was typical at that time, the walls and ceilings are surfaced with lime plaster bound with red cattle hair. When plumbing and heating systems were added in the early 20th century, they were installed without disturbing much of the original construction. Seeing these houses, we connect to the past and step inside the lives of Mary and Eliza Freeman.
Many artifacts were recovered during the Phase 1 restoration, and Connecticut State archaeologist Nick Bellantoni believes that many more artifacts are yet to be uncovered in 2 areas of the backyard. In 1848, there was no curbside trash pickup. Most people buried their trash in a corner of the yard. Archaeologists can learn a lot about day-to-day life from looking at people's trash.
What did people eat? What objects were thrown away? What kinds of objects will you see in the archaeological record? And what kinds of objects will you not see? Paper and textiles don't often survive in the archaeological record, and objects that were considered important may have been mended or passed down. What do you think archaeologists will find at the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses?
So far, most of the objects recovered tell us a lot about 19th century food and cooking and occupations. An archaeology site is like a time capsule for human behavior. However, excavation of a site destroys its context. Archaeologists are trained to pay close attention to soil and other physical features and to measure and record their observation.
In general, when you throw something away, the oldest stuff is at the bottom, and the most recent stuff is close to the top. The archaeological record is not always so neat. Trash heaps can be buried, plowed under, flooded, etc. Plus, we're likely to find a lot of stuff that doesn't relate to the 19th century. How do archaeologists date stuff?
The first thing archaeologists look for is what is an object made of and how is it made? Can you sort these objects into categories? Ceramic, glass, metal, and wood are the most common. In a trash heap, you may also find animal bone and seeds. Of course, you may also find plastic.
In the ceramics category, researchers found some interesting patterned shards, 3 unbroken stoneware bottles, and a yellow clay bowl. We are not likely to see stoneware bottles today, but in the 19th century, people bought and reused these kinds of containers when they purchased beer and other non-alcoholic beverages at inns and restaurants. These stoneware bottles and the yellow clay bowl match ceramics produced in the 19th century in Norwalk, Hartford, and Norwich. Glass is another material category. Finding unbroken or mostly unbroken glass objects, it's easier to see how an object was made. Bottles, for instance, were mouth-blown and machine press molded during the 19th century. Although most beverages were sold in stoneware containers like those we just saw, whiskey was sold in glass bottles. Whiskey was popular in New England after the 1820 opening of the Erie Canal. Metal objects are a third material category. These objects are sometimes hard to date because they're so durable. Flatware, like the fork and spoons, are also used over a long period of time, but can sometimes be dated by the style of stamped design. Only the tin can is easy to date. The technology to make the can and sterilize the food inside was expensive in the 19th century. Canned foods and beverages only become commonplace after the invention of the can opener in 1936.
This is a second set of objects recovered from the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses. We see objects made of the same kinds of materials: ceramics, glass, metal, wood, and animal shells. But these objects tell a different kind of story about the occupations or activities that went on at the houses. What kinds of occupations do you see illustrated by these objects? Jobs for women in the 19th century were often limited to activities related to the home: sewing and clothes repair, laundry, cook, domestic helper, and in the case of Mary and Eliza Freeman, landlords.
Nearly all clothing was sewn at home in the 19th century. Sewing and clothes repair is represented by wooden spools, shell buttons, and steel scissors. Laundry was also a significant task in the 19th century. Soap was made at home, and water had to be pumped and carried from the well and heated on the wood-burning stove. Clothes and linens were scrubbed, rinsed, and hung to dry on the clothesline. Researchers estimate that the women of Little Liberia may have held a monopoly on the laundry trade of the city. The yards of many of the homes in Little Liberia would have been filled with clotheslines and stretching racks for lace curtains and tablecloths. Finally, we see some evidence of the sisters' activities as cook, domestic help, and landlord. Clam, oyster, and mussel shells were found beneath the kitchen wing floors in Mary Freeman's house. Oysters were eaten in huge quantities throughout the 19th century. Bridgeport oystermen sold oysters locally and to inns and restaurants in New York City. William H. Davis of Little Liberia was Bridgeport's oyster king. He almost certainly supplied the oysters for Abraham Lincoln during his campaign stop in Bridgeport in 1860. Other items which may indicate the comings and goings of guests at the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses include a pipe carved from the wood of a briar tree found only in Algeria and Morocco, keys, likely from a clock, the smaller one, and a wall cabinet, of which Mary's house has several, a fancy etched cordial glass, and porcelain doorknobs. Doorknobs were a brand new invention in the 1840s and very expensive. Doors with knobs would have been used for formal rooms or the front door. Small doors with latches were used for bedrooms and other rooms unseen by guests. Today, the Freeman sisters' homes are the last remaining buildings from this historic settlement. Many stories about Mary and Eliza Freeman and the Little Liberia community are waiting to be uncovered. What questions are you curious to learn more about? What was it like for children to grow up in Little Liberia? What was school like in the 19th century? What was it like to work in other 19th century trades like shipbuilding or whaling? What kinds of historical records could you look for in order to learn more about those historic trades? How did churches like the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church and the Walters African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church support religious and spiritual growth, as well as social relations and politics in the community? What kinds of community institutions are important to you? What can you do to help share the story of Little Liberia?
I'm gonna sing till the spirit moves in my heart. I'm gonna sing till the spirit moves.
I'm Maisa Tisdale, and I'm the president of the Mary and Eliza Freeman Center for History and Community. And right now, we're standing in the heart of historic Little Liberia. This is Walters AME Zion Church, the oldest surviving African American church in Fairfield County, and right across the way are the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses. This church was built by three men. One of them was the founder of Little Liberia, Joel Freeman, Mary and Eliza's brother, and they found that there really wasn't a role, there really wasn't a place for them, status for them as free men. That's why people really started this community, to be safe, to offer sanctuary, and to prosper using their God-given gifts and talents. Little Liberia turns 200 years old in 2021. The Mary and Eliza Freeman houses are just a block away from here. They would have stood big and bold, and they would have been really prominent on the block. One of the challenges that we faced from getting people to understand and embrace the story was the fact that there were no photographs, that all of the other buildings had been torn down.
To see it from that perspective makes me feel the presence of the ghosts of the other buildings that have been lost, and like recognize the sturdiness of these that are still remaining.
I can just picture Mary and Eliza Freeman coming out in the morning on their porches, looking across at this community that was around them, that was both beautiful with gardens. I bet they could hear the choir singing from the church as they walked this way. This was a planned community, an early planned community where people of different socioeconomic levels, different levels of education lived together. It was a sanctuary city, and it was very much an inclusive place. It was a place where people visited from all over the U.S., and they wanted to take advantage of this new invention called the railroad. For those of us who studied Little Liberia and the Freeman houses, this community was alive. We could see it in our minds, we could hear it, we could smell the flowers, we could hear the bustle, but how did we share that with everyone else?
Thank you for making the learning experience easier and more enjoyable. Oh my God. I can't read it. This is so nice. Dear Ms. Shauna, thank you so much for your tour and teaching of Little Liberia, all about the past and how it impacts us now. Thank you so much for your time and support. Lots of love. And this is when we were standing outside the house. That's when they got to ask questions about the history and they first walked up. For the first few minutes, they just stand there staring and like taking it all in and getting an understanding of, you know, the shape and the levels. And so they really just absorb it, and it's almost like they saw something they've only imagined for the first time.
Little Liberia wasn't the only settlement of free people of color that was an underground railroad destination community that offered sanctuary, but it's the only one that's left. It's the only one that still has original buildings on their original foundations. It's endangered. It's the last of its kind. So we don't have a chance to go back in time and save those Liberias. They've been plowed under, knocked down long ago by urban renewal. But we can save this one.
And then maybe the longer term project is the development of this site into housing and the Center for History and Community, the sort of like more built out version of this. So that's one of the two kind of design drawings that we're going to have. But I also want to show you sort of the rest of the sort of structure for the document, again, all in draft form. So like, for example, this image here, I love, and there's you can find many of these images where like the ghosts of historical structures are actually felt in the landscape. Are you okay? I didn't realize you were crying. I can't tell if that's good or bad. It's good, okay, it's good. Well, we've only just begun, Maisa. Wait till you see the end result.
We are planning a community in the South End for the future that is inclusive, that is inviting, and that helps people live up to the aspirations of this nation the way it was supposed to be.
Jesus.